Their technical higher ed amendments.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Senate and House Education Conference Committee. To kind of get you up to speed, we are working Senate Bill 123. We have made amendments to it, offered amendments to add the contents of House Bill 2400 and the contents of the 2132, the Promise Act, to it as well, and we were in the midst of discussion on that. So that is kind of where we are and where we're leading off. I did pass out to the committee answers to some of the questions we got on House Bill 2400. And so with that, let's continue the discussion on Senate Bill 123. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before we go through the handout on House Bill 2400, the Adult Learner Grant, could we circle back to the 2132, which I think you're referring to as the Promise? So talk to us again about the committee or the task force or the group that the request.
Okay, Representative Estes.
The purpose of having an interim committee is to make sure, because it's been a long time since we adopted 155, that we are doing a good job of talking to industry and looking at what we are prioritizing when we make our spending decisions, and what are the highest need jobs, what are the highest need industries, and which investments get us the highest return on investment. And I had included in further conversation, as we're still in the draft mode on that phase of the amendment, representatives from education, commerce, the Board of Regents, and various industries. And one I failed to mention, but someone mentioned to me, and I'm having added to my amendment, was agribusiness. And then I believe the senator on my far left mentioned technology, so I'm adding that to my amendment as well. And I did add private colleges as well.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'm curious, so this is is this in regard to Senate Bill 155, the CTE, which is high school, funding for high school training, or is this in conjunction with the Promise Scholarship?
Representative Estes.
It is really a reflection of all. We're doing a little here and a little there and a little there. And we're hearing from industry that we fail to check in on them. And as things change in the marketplace and needs change, we kind of tend to assume that everything is the same. So the information that we glean out of an interim will help us to make better decisions with updated input.
Okay, I'm just with a little bit more thought to this. You know, typically when we have an interim, we have, sorry, it's my majority leader. Typically when we have an interim, we have X number of House members and X number of Senate members, and then we have a set agenda. So this to me is less an interim meeting and it is more of a roundtable discussion. I guess I would rather see that we have House and Senate members, and perhaps it would be members from education committees and commerce committees, and then the chair and the vice chair work together with the appropriate groups to come and provide the information. So we would need data as far as what's happening, I think, at the high school level with Senate Bill 155. We should probably be looking at what is being funded as far as VE funding for high school, because VE courses will receive that extra 0.5 for funding. So are we funding courses at the high school level that perhaps are no longer even necessary to have VE funding? And we should have those organizations that are working to deliver that instruction. So there's been no mention of technical colleges or community colleges. And, you know, community colleges, for their different areas of expertise, have those advisory committees, as do the technical colleges. So I guess I agree that we need to be looking at what we're doing with regard to funding for career readiness and for what's happening as far as technical education. But I think that when we're talking about technical education, we need to recognize that that's starting from high school and it's going all the way up to postgraduate. And I'm not seeing that that's represented in this group, and I likewise don't see this as what would customarily be an interim committee. Likewise, I think we should come up separately with a request for the interim committee for the LCC to approve. I can't think of a time where an interim committee has been legislated specifically. They tend to be a proviso because they're kind of a one-time shot. So I would rather have us work on coming up with the language for leadership, and perhaps rather than what's typical of, we're going to meet for 2 days, that we meet, you know, that we have a period of time where we're focusing on what's happening at the high school level. So that would encompass Department of Ed data, as well as community colleges, technical colleges. Then we would focus a little bit on a separate day, how that's being fulfilled or not being fulfilled with Promise scholarships and the Promise Act, and look at it in that context, knowing that we're talking about different types of delivery, different types of funding, and so that we really can be looking to see, and perhaps in the end, focus on how do they intersect from that Venn diagram? How are they totally not intersecting or interacting? And so I see that more as an LCC request, less as a legislative request. I think as we look at it, we'll continue to see groups that need to be represented. But I think it would be better served that we spend time to get the appropriate groups as a chair and vice chair are coordinating it, and we get that approval up front from LCC as opposed to legislating it.
Representative Estes.
As I'm still in the process of working with the reviser to finish that language, I'd prefer us just to come back when it's more presentable so it can clear up some of these things, and we'll have a work product in front of us, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
I'm all for that. That's fine. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I don't want to hold up this particular bill. I don't want to hold up Senate Bill 123 if we can get an agreement on 123 kicked out. Then we can circle back around, knowing that to get an interim committee doesn't require legislation. We have between now and sine die to get that LCC request and approval. And I think that would give time for, what we don't want to have happen is, well, how come we weren't on the list? And once we move forward, how come we weren't on the list? I would rather us be fluid with that and not be constrained by getting this bill out and moving forward from the legislative process.
Representative Estes?
I think we can continue to move forward on the other parts of what we have on the table and come back to this later. And doing that doesn't hold anything up because we are talking about putting in other bills and other language, and we can visit about those things and come back to this later.
Senator Baumgartner?
I guess as a point of clarification, are we saying that we're going to wait? I'm trying to look at it from a practical standpoint. The Senate doesn't have a reviser. And that means Jason is doing lots of heavy lifting, as is Nick in our other committee. So what I don't want is a reviser to spend hours on an amendment or a recommendation that perhaps, I'm not going to speak for my other two members, but if the Senate is going to hold firm on a position, I don't want those hours to have been wasted if they could be moved forward on something else. That's my only point. I'm trying to be considerate of folks that I know are putting in 28-plus hour days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I would say that, you know, we all appreciate the revisers and their processes for sure, but I think also if the position of the Senate is drawing a hard line on that one, I think we need to continue the discussions and have that amendment ready and discuss the amendment when it's ready versus just taking a hard line position and stopping now and passing out a bill out of conference that we're still in discussions on. So I would say until we get the amendment, let's move on from this and let's work on the other things that we want to put in this bill or discuss and then come back to it.
Okay,
Senator Baumgartner.
can you give us a few minutes? Okay.
That's fine.
We will be making motions to amend the Promise Act and 2400 into 123, and we'd like to put it into 123 because it's not limited to one bill.
Senator Baumgartner.
So the question is, right now, where does the language reside for the interim committee?
Representative Estes.
In amendment.
Okay.
With that being, I think our rules say that for something to go into a conference committee, it has to have passed one chamber or the other. So if that is new language where I see it could be good, it has not passed separately in a chamber.
Very good. We will drop that for now and let's move on.
I think what I want to do is I do want to work with Representative Estes to make sure that we come up with the outline of what are the goals and objectives, and that we put together a joint request that goes to our LCC for that. Now, I guess what we need to do is circle back around on 2400. So you did provide us with some information. So the grant is payable to the institution where the students are enrolled, and it's for $3,000 per semester,
Correct.
regardless of how many credits they enroll in?
No, I believe it's prorated based off the number of credits they take. So if you have only 3 credit hours, I believe the payout is less. You maximize it when you have a higher number of credit hours that you're taking.
Okay. And do I understand that FAFSA, they must complete FAFSA, so this would be after FAFSA funding. So we would take whatever full or partial FAFSA and stack this on top.
That's correct.
But it's only going to pay to the institution, so is that going to cover tuition only, or does it include books and supplies? And it may be silent to that.
Mr. Chairman, the original bill did have some specification as to the tuition and fees and cost of books, but all that language was stricken in an amendment, and so now it's just $3,000 per semester, prorated on the basis of how many credit hours the student is enrolled in, but there is no specification as to what that is applicable to.
Okay. So I guess from that standpoint, it is the Board of Regents that is going to be administering this, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think we need to button down that language, because if in fact we are wanting in a situation, and let's use healthcare as an example, because you had shared that might be one of those degree options. Healthcare, there are going to be stethoscopes, very expensive. Uniforms are a cost for someone going into, earning a BSN. So I think that we need to, what I do know, because we have House Bill 2060, where we had to clarify the AOK language, that it does include supplies and materials. Because if we don't do that, KBOR will not process the funding for that. So if we think that even that they would be eligible to use it for textbooks and other materials, I think we have to codify that, or those students aren't going to be able to have access to the funding for that. And That's one of the reasons in Promise, we indicated, you're going to have to get your stethoscope and your materials and supplies and textbooks from the institution. And so that would still work, that is payable to the institution. But if we're willing to include materials and supplies and textbooks, then we need to say that. Or the Board of Regents, who, they're gone now, aren't they? No one's here from the Board of Regents. It would be helpful if they were, but I know from rules and regs going through that, they're going to say, well, if the legislators wanted that, they would have put that in there. So if that's something that we want, I think we need to put it in there. And I think if the goal is to make sure with FAFSA as well as this, that we want them to be able to jump in, then I think we need to commit. And Jason, I'm sorry, but we need an amendment on that.
Would that be language that hasn't passed either House or Senate, though? Senator Sykes.
So it looks like in the bill in section 4, that was stricken, so it is original language.
Very good.
So we could simply ask, I think our Senate ask might be that that language be brought back in.
Was that stripped before it passed the House floor? I believe it was. So that would be my concern, was I don't know that that has passed either chamber, if that got amended out before it passed the House floor. But
It would mean that you would relinquish the House position on that. Either way, if you passed it out of committee where you struck it in committee, it was in original language. And that's what got codified. And we could simply say, we feel it needs back in, and you would have to decide as representatives of the House, are you willing to give that up as far as a House position?
certainly willing to consider it, yeah, that's for sure. We don't want to just close the door on it, for sure.
So the escalator, explain how the escalator works. It says there's an escalator. Oh, so that's struck out. I'm sorry. Now I understand. It's struck out.
Correct.
And there was no clawback in there, correct? Okay.
Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a couple of inquiries between sessions or between meetings today, asking if the way that they were reading House Bill 2400 was that we might be paying for online courses to institutions that are actually not located in Kansas.
Jason?
Mr. Chairman, under House Bill 2400, the definition of an eligible post-secondary educational institution means one of the Regents institutions, a municipal university, and a not-for-profit institution of post-secondary education with its main campus or principal place of operation in Kansas, and a not-for-profit independent institution of higher education which is accredited by an institutional accrediting agency recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. That does not have a requirement to be principal place in Kansas. So yes, it could potentially be a not-for-profit independent institution of higher education that's accredited but operated independently, as long as it maintains open enrollment, it offers online education, and offers exclusively competency-based education programs, it would qualify.
So I'm not terribly enthused about sending Kansas taxpayer money institutions out of state.
I think the main point of this bill in and of itself is for your Western Kansas folks, your rural folks that don't have access, that are looking in this age group over 25 to finish their education. Again, I'll go back to even my wife herself did this, signed on and took her courses. She's staying in Kansas. She's not leaving Kansas. So every dollar she earns, every taxable income that she earns stays in Kansas. Everywhere she shops, everywhere these people will go and spend their money, all of that revenue will stay in Kansas versus going out of state.
Have we looked at what kind of courses and so on, or curriculums that we would be looking at that would require a student to use an out-of-state institution? I mean, I can't imagine with all our community colleges, with all of our secondary or universities, colleges, that sort of thing, that there would be much that one of our students would want to take that would require out-of-state online coursework.
Well, I think the benefit to doing it is, like I said, it's benefiting in-state Kansas students. That's the point. So they're taking these courses either online and they're staying in Kansas versus going out and spending their money elsewhere, moving to another state, or just not finishing college at all and not getting that degree to get them a higher paying job, to make them a more, you know, able to pay, make a higher wage, shop in Kansas and keep their money in Kansas, and we also keep the taxable revenue.
No, I think it's a good bill. I appreciate the concept behind it. I would just like to make sure that maybe there's some way that we could guarantee that if those courses were offered in Kansas, that those students would take those courses in Kansas and give that money to Kansas institutions.
Senator Baumgartner.
One of the things I think we have to take into consideration is not all universities, but a lot of them go by the semester basis, so fall, spring, summer. And I know that if a student is looking for a virtual program, they're going to be looking at when can they jump in, and they're going to make a determination based on that. That's one of the reasons that many, but not all community colleges have started to offer late start classes and shorter sessions year-round, like an 8-week session, and have broken from the tradition. I understand and appreciate the concern about tax dollars out of state. I would remind the legislators that we pay for out-of-state students, and they are counted, and we pay, taxpayers pay for them to attend our public schools. So there are some we have out-of-state kids that are attending our public schools, and the Kansas taxpayers are funding that. No other state is funding it. The parents of the out-of-state kids are not funding it, but the state of Kansas taxpayers are funding that.
Well, I think also it addresses sort of the unique needs of the student themselves. You know, not everybody can go to the brick and mortar. Not everybody offers the same programs, and I think this is just an extra tool in the toolkit to help middle class folks that want to go back and finish their schooling. Gives them an option to do so and stay in Kansas versus moving out of state.
But again, you have identified 4 learning areas. That's prescribed in this, correct?
Correct.
So if it's online, it's only going to be if they're within those prescribed areas.
Correct.
Okay, and it has to be a university. It's not going to be a technical college or a community college for this.
Further discussion? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we would like to have clawback language. I think we would like it to be similar to what is in the current Promise Act. There is a question that I had with regard to, I know with the Promise Act bill, you are wanting to amend it so that the GPA has to be 2.0. Is there a GPA requirement on this one?
I don't believe so. Representative Estes.
That's something I plan to address by amendment once it's in there.
I think it would be appropriate if we were consistent with this, as well as, so much of this is very similar to the promise. So if we could get the language for the clawback, I think that would be helpful. And then when you have the language for the 2.0 GPA, I think that would be helpful if as long as Jason's writing it, if we could have it for both.
All right, we're going to ask for just a couple minutes to step outside and discuss, if that's okay. We'll be right back. That's all right. Sorry about that. So we're just clarifying a few things back there. I think to continue to the discussion, I think we certainly need these positions in this bill before we can continue the conversation. So I would make a motion that we go ahead and add 2132 and 2400 to Senate Bill 123 currently, and then when the amendment is done, then we have a position and we have a bill, and then we can discuss the amendments, or the amendment that's coming. Senator Baumgartner.
Mr. Chair, why don't we stop where we are right now on Senate Bill 123? I know that Senator Erickson has an ask at this time.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the leeway here. I was wanting to put the contents of 2388 as passed by the House. It passed 121 to 0. Originally, I was wanting to put it in to 123, but with the additional content, it will no longer fit. So I would like to go back to Senate Bill 66 and look at putting the contents of 2388 into Senate Bill 66, if that's appropriate.
The issue with Senate Bill 66 is that's a compact bill, so if we add that language in there, all the other states that adopt this compact would have to include that same language in that bill.
Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 66 does have compact language, and the language that is for the compact must be identical, but you can add other provisions from other bills. They would not be part of the compact, and therefore they wouldn't vary the compact from what has been passed by other states.
Fair. Okay. Jason, you want to provide us a briefing on 2388?
Mr. Chairman, it appears the bill deals with occupational licensing and requiring licensing bodies to provide verified electronic credentials in addition to paper credentials to all credential holders, including military service members and others receiving Kansas credentials based on their credentials from other jurisdictions, and requiring licensing bodies to use centralized electronic credential data management systems capable of providing instantaneous credential verification, and mandating that such systems maintain an auditable record, and accepting certification of law enforcement officers from such electronic credential requirements and other provisions. I could probably provide a more full summary after I've had a chance to read the bill.
I remember this bill now. Yes, the House can concur to that amendment, definitely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Sure. So heading back to 123, the House would certainly request that the Senate concur with our positions, and then we can continue the discussion once we have the amendments.
Why don't you give us a few minutes?
Take your time. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reviser did share that he had the language on the grade point average for the promise, and so I think it would be helpful if we could just look at that, and maybe we can just move forward with regard to an agreement on that component, adding that component into the bill.
Very good. If we could have the amendment, please.
This is, okay, I'm going to show this, just a little amendment. Here we are.
Jason.
Down at the bottom.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the amendment appears long, but only because we have to bring a statute into the bill in order to make the amendment within the Promise Act. The amendment actually appears down in subsection B1A, where you see the language starts out, maintain satisfactory academic progress in the courses of the Promise eligible program, and the student would be required under the new language to maintain a cumulative grade point average of 2.0 or higher or the equivalent thereof.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Jason, as we look through this, is that a cumulative grade point average of the Promise eligible program courses? Or oftentimes we will see students that perhaps started at a university, weren't so successful, left the university, and have come back and they're kind of restarting. So they might restart at a technical college or at a community college. In higher ed vernacular, cumulative means anything that you have on a higher ed transcript, and that means courses you took and might have failed elsewhere. So I just want clarification. Maintain satisfactory academic progress in the courses of the promise-eligible program. So when we say, and maintain a cumulative grade point, is that going to include those transcripts that they brought forward and perhaps weren't so successful?
Mr. Chairman, it is a separate, distinct requirement of the student. So they would have two requirements. One, to maintain satisfactory academic progress in the courses of their eligible program. Two, separately, have a cumulative grade point average of 2.0 or higher on their transcript.
And that will be a problem because we will have current Promise scholars that will be dropped from their scholarship because of this. And just, I mean, I did have that verified.
Representative Estes.
In light of that verification, I will go ahead and make it program, but we have talked a lot about accountability and making sure that we are using taxpayer funds to people who are really all in on taking the promise and being successful Kansans. But I will concede to your point if the rest of our group does.
Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you. And so Jason, can you wordsmith that for us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it would read, maintain satisfactory academic progress, including a grade point average of 2.0 or higher or the equivalent thereof in courses of the promise eligible program.
We're good with that. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you so much. I believe we're good with that as well. And I think all of us sitting here are in total agreement with Representative Estes. This is truly a carrot that the state of Kansas taxpayers are putting out there, and we do want that best effort. I think that also puts an onus on the institutions that they need to be working to make sure students fully understand that the Promise Scholarship is an obligation. It is a carrot, but there are obligations with it. You are going to have to focus and keep your GPA up there. You have to be passing. And likewise, you know, you're going to have to abide by that notion of completing within the time frame and then working within Kansas. So I think it's totally appropriate to put this in there. We do want kids to be successful, and we know sometimes they started off and weren't so serious, and it's a couple years later. We just don't want to have those that have already started be dropped. So I appreciate that willingness to work with that. And I think with this, we are in agreement from the Senate side with regard to where we are on adding the language for House Bill 2132.
And 2400.
Actually, we are not in agreement on 2400. So I think that we'll have to wait until we get those amendments when we meet tomorrow. Do we know when we will meet tomorrow?
The House is on the floor at 10 a.m. What time is the Senate on the floor?
10.
10. So we could shoot for 11:30.
We're meeting at 11 with the other education committee. Do you want to do noon?
We can do noon.
Do we want to do noon? We think high noon. I don't know. I saw KNEA just raise his eyebrows, so I think that's a yes. Or is it chili and cinnamon rolls? What's the menu for tomorrow?
Well, with that, we can further discuss chili and cinnamon rolls between now and then. With that, I believe we will meet back at noon. We'll have a room number, hopefully fairly quickly. It'll probably be in here. All right. With that, for now, we are adjourned. Thank you.